Lilith, a figure from Jewish mythology, has had quite the journey over the centuries. From demon to first wife of Adam to unlikely feminist icon, she has only grown in prominence over the last few decades. Since the 1970s, Lilith has found her way through American comics and novels, and 15 years ago she entered the television realm, where she has been something of a staple ever since. Lilith is best known as the first woman, a wife who refused to be subservient to her husband. But as her story is told again and again by different writers, and moved from a Jewish to a Christian framework, the subversiveness that defined her character has given way to a more submissive demeanor. There have been many variations of Lilith over the centuries, and I will most definitely be providing an incredibly simplified explanation here today. Throughout folklore, she has been an evil spirit, a succubus, a demon queen, a monster that comes in the night. She's not a part of the Torah, but the most commonly accepted tale of her can be traced back to the Alphabet of Ben Sira, written anonymously in Europe sometime between 700 and 1000 Common Era. Here, Lilith is Adam's first wife. In a translation of their argument, she declares, "I will not lie below," and he said, "I will not lie beneath you, but only on top, for you are fit only to be in the bottom position, while I am to be in the superior one." Lilith responded, "We are equal to each other inasmuch as we are both created from the earth." Lilith was created from the same earth as Adam, and when he demands she submit to him, she flees Eden. Adam appeals to God to bring her back, but when the angels find Lilith, giving her a choice between returning or being drowned, she refuses both, saying, "I was created only to cause sickness to infants. If the infant is male, I have dominion over him for 8 days, and if female, for 20 days. Now, this is where the tale becomes divided between an earlier and a later version. In this original version, the angels agree and leave her alone. It should also be said that God declared that 100 of Lilith's children, as in demons, will die for every day she refuses to return. A later version attempts to fill in the gaps, particularly around why the angels would so easily agree to leave Lilith alone. In this later version, after Lilith's speech, there is an addition following the angel's threat, "If you do not come back, we shall drown you in the sea." She answers, "I cannot return because of what is said in the Torah. Her former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled. That is, when he was the last to sleep with her, and the great demon has already slept with me." Now, the folkloric change from the great demon to the fallen angel Samael was a relatively quick one. The great demon in question needed a name, and since Lilith was part of the Eden narrative and Samael was part of the Eden narrative, folklore just quickly connected the two. And so Lilith became Samael's lover and or bride. Much later in the 13th century text Sefer HaZohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism, Lilith becomes a figure of divine judgment brought about by human sin to be subdued at the end of time by Michael and Gabriel. If you're interested in more on this topic, the source can be found below in the description under the last name Dan. As you can glean from the Ben Sira text, Lilith's argument with Adam over equality versus superiority originates specifically as a sexual argument. Lilith is a folklore villain that represents a fear of female sexuality and autonomy, as well as a figure of pregnancy, motherhood, and infanticide. And so, inevitably perhaps, Lilith made her way into non-Jewish culture. Unfortunately, we don't really have time to cover her entire journey through all of art and literature, but skipping ahead to the 20th century, Lilith made her entrance into American culture through comic books. Here I lean heavily on the work of scholars Geoffrey and Avi Dennis in their article Vampires and Witches and Commandos Oy Vey, which covers the American comic acceptance of Lilith. First introduced to the comic scene in 1971 in Vampirella, Lilith's story was told with a particularly Christian lens where she's a dark-haired temptress who hates humanity, is cast out of Eden, and replaced by a blonde Eve. Marvel Comics would later publish 4 iterations of Lilith. The first was a single-page retelling in 1974 in which she was the first vampire, a panel of which read, "Lilith paid a tragic price for her liberated defiance. The angels slaughtered the children she'd had by Adam." Later that same year, a Jewish creative team at Marvel reinvented her as the daughter of Dracula. An antagonist in the Tomb of Dracula series, Lilith became a vengeful feminist figure, taking violent revenge on men who harmed women. Her main goal was to kill her father, Dracula, as retribution for him driving her mother to suicide. And unlike Dracula, Lilith was said to never cower from the crucifix. In the 90s, Lilith was reinvented as the mother of dragons, drawing on Kabbalah for her evil characterization and demon children. But by the 21st century, Lilith was again reinvented as Lily Drake, daughter of Dracula, and had lost all connection to her Jewish roots. She has appeared elsewhere in comics as well, Rachel Rising and Sandman, to name a couple. The Dennises conclude that by the 21st century, Lilith has been so accepted by non-Jewish American culture that she's lost the aspects that made her a Jewish character in the first place. Lilith can be tracked through American literature and culture since the 1970s. The one that stands out the most to me is actually Octavia Butler's books from the 80s. By the 1990s, Lilith had been pretty well established as a feminist figure in American culture, reflected in Sarah McLachlan founding the Lilith Fair annual concert in the late 90s. And it's not hard to understand why. Lilith demands equality, she's openly sexual, and exists as an outsider. Lilith made the leap to the small screen in the 21st century. She begins her journey here in the 2004 TV film Darklight, before hitting more mainstream television in 2008 in Supernatural. Since then, she's made a few more appearances, but her most recent and most prominent is as a main character in Netflix's Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Each of these productions brings its own interpretation when adapting the Lilith myth to the television format. They each make different decisions in regards to her being a protagonist or an antagonist, and choose different aspects of her myth to focus on. But before we can get into all of that, technically the earliest televised appearance of Lilith that I've been able to find came in the 1980s in the form of Lilith Sternin from Cheers. Frasier's wife and then ex-wife in the Frasier spin-off, this Lilith is in no way supernatural. However, her name and cold demeanor allude to a demonesque nature, and she is referred to by the other characters as Frosty the Ice Queen, Frosty the Snow Wife, Witch, and Demon.
There are two approaches a woman can take in turning her look to her advantage. The first is to play upon the male sexual drive and turn yourself into an object of desire. I have opted for the second.
What's that?
Scaring them stupid.
The story arc in the series, marrying Frasier, giving birth to his son, having an affair, divorcing Frasier, and winning custody of the child, reads like a toned-down version of the Lilith figure. While there is admittedly a lot more that can be said about this character, my aim today is to examine the Lilith characters that attempt to adapt the myth, rather than allude to it. An adaptation of the supernatural mythical Lilith aired in 2004 as Darklight, a sci-fi TV movie starring Shuri Appleby. In Darklight, Lilith is a young woman with no memory of her past. She goes by the name Elle, the only piece of her identity that she can remember, and she's closely monitored by members of an organization called the Faith. Her backstory is given in the opening narration.
Some believe that Eve was the first woman born of the Garden of Eden. Others believe there was another, created flawed, imperfect, from a substance most vile. Her name is Lilith. She believed she was Adam's equal, would not lie beneath him. For this, she was cast out.
Though this narration paints a dark picture of Lilith, we don't really see it in the present-day character. Writer-director Bill Platt, aware of both her darker myth and contemporary status as a feminist figure, said he wanted to create a Jewish superhero character, and jokingly refers to the film as Sci-chai. For him, the film is about Lilith choosing to fight for good and reject the darkness inside her. In the film, Lilith is said to be made of dark light, an energy as old as the universe, and it's from this energy that she draws her power. In a brief summary, the plot pits Lilith against a scientist named Anders Rayborn, who is trying to devise a serum that will grant him immortality, and his partner in crime, Trader's Faith member Chapel, whom in all my notes I really just refer to as John Delancey. Lilith finds a mentor in William Shaw, a member of the Faith whose son she had murdered several years prior. This understandably creates contention between them, and Shaw's grief is part of what drives Lilith to understand and overcome her past. Along with her memory loss, Lilith has 5 marks on her arm that she learns are the fictional marks of Dagoth, marks that are representative of her evil past and can be erased through selflessness. As much as the film struggles to connect past Lilith with present Lilith, it wants us to be invested in her redemption arc. Early in the film, when she sees that a young boy is about to be hit by a car, she saves his life and injures herself in the process, and this act erases one of her marks. By the end of the film, after saving the world from a deadly virus unleashed by the monstrous Anders, Lilith loses a second mark. In their work on Lilith in comics, the Dennises define the concept of Jewish heroism by contrasting Christian and Jewish Messiah concepts. The uniquely Christian vision of the Messiah is the supernal empowered chosen one who surrenders and sacrifices himself and dies for the good of humanity. The Jewish Messiah, by contrast, is the empowered chosen one who strives and struggles, who lives for the good of humanity, ultimately to triumph over adversity and evil, but without losing himself. So if Platt's goal was to create a Jewish superhero, he succeeded. The story ends not with Lilith sacrificing herself for humanity, or even with her finishing her redemption, but instead ends on the note of a continued struggle for redemption. She still has 3 marks of Daggett left and a long list of victims that she must in some way make up for. She destroys the cave where she murdered Shah's son, telling the audience of her desire to move forward and make things right. Despite the film successfully creating a Jewish superhero, I'd argue that it is far less successful in adapting Lilith to the screen. The subplot of William Shaw grieving his son's death points to a certain theme of the film, fatherhood. Throughout the story, the male characters are driven by father-son conflicts. William Shaw's grief, Anders' desire to kill his own father, and Chapel's disdain for his own late father, another of Lilith's victims whose faith he believes led to his death. But among all these fathers and sons, the film makes no mention of Lilith's own motherhood. And while she killed Shah's son, an implication of her penchant for infanticide, there's nothing that suggests a preference of child murders. And there's no discussion of her sexuality. In fact, we know as much about Lilith as a character as she seems to know about herself. We're told about her disastrous marriage to Adam and departure from Eden. We're told about her violence, but we don't know anything about her goals and motivations. She doesn't have a job and is initially uninterested in being Lilith because she has her, quote, own problems. Though, apart from her desire to uncover her identity as, Lilith, we're not really told what those problems are. In fact, if it weren't for the mention of her being Adam's first wife and an apparent Achilles' heel in the form of bark from the tree in the Garden of Eden, she could have been swapped out for any villain of myth. And even when it comes to her being Adam's wife, the film still says she was created flawed, imperfect, from something vile, rather than from the same earth as Adam, as the myth goes. 4 years later, Lilith made the transition from a low-budget sci-fi TV movie to the popular long-running TV series Supernatural, where she was the primary antagonist of seasons 3 and 4. Unlike Darklight, however, Supernatural is Christian in its framework, and because of that Christian framework, Lilith's myth becomes entangled with several Christian motifs. Released from hell at the end of Season 2, Season 3 shows brother protagonists Sam and Dean overwhelmed by Lilith's quick and sudden rise to power. The series doesn't shy away from her infanticidal tendencies. It says that she eats babies, and throughout Season 3 she appears in the bodies of little girls that she possesses. In these bodies, Lilith is seen both commanding her demon followers, as well as tormenting the host girls' families and murdering house pets, which is apparently what she does to relax. But apart from her name and admittedly terrifying characterization, Season 3 reveals almost nothing about who Lilith is and doesn't delve into her myth at all. Season 4, however, made some pretty big changes. The first is that Lilith stopped appearing as a little girl and almost exclusively appeared as this woman, the body of a dental assistant that she's possessing. The reason for the change is the writers felt that having Sam kill a little girl wouldn't be great for keeping audience sympathy. Apparently, killing women is just fine, though. In her new body, however, the series leaned into the sexual aspect of Lilith's character. She was characterized as a seductress, and more than one character commented on her physical attractiveness. Part of the series lore is that when a character wants to make a deal with a Crossroads demon, they have to kiss the demon in order to seal a deal. But with Lilith, the character would have to have sex with her, which is just, like, I wish that I could just, throw out the whole suitcase, but, we're only here to unpack things, so I have to unpack it. Supernatural's portrayal of Lilith invokes that fear of female sexuality, and it wants the audience to feel that fear as Sam nearly goes through with the act to make a deal with her and is stopped at the last moment by Dean. And that fear of female sexuality extends to Lilith's follower Ruby. After 2 seasons of deceiving the brothers and the audience into believing that Ruby was a demon on their side, Ruby, who at this point was in a sexual relationship with Sam, is revealed to have been using Sam to accomplish Lilith's goal. Ruby is immediately killed by the brothers after this revelation. But arguably, the biggest change from season 3 to season 4 is the show's attempt to flesh out Lilith's character and motivation. While season 3 had Lilith as a ruler figure quickly amassing her own demon following, season 4 re-characterizes her as something of a lieutenant. Throughout the season, Lilith is committing specific acts of destruction, and these acts are revealed to be her slowly breaking the 66 seals on Lucifer's cage. Instead of a demon interested in her own power, her entire motivation is now based around freeing Lucifer. Even her origin story becomes about him, as her myth is rewritten.
Demon Sunday school story. God prefers humans to angels. Lucifer gets jealous, and then he gets creative, and he twists and tempts a human soul into the very first demon, as a screw you to God. That's what got him locked up in the first place.
That was Lilith?
She's way older than she looks.
Instead of her choosing to leave Adam and Eden for her own freedom, her corruption is now written as an act of rebellion by Lucifer. And again, the series makes no mention of Lilith's motherhood. As the brothers try to stop Lilith from breaking the final seal and releasing Lucifer, it's revealed that the final seal is actually Lilith's death. Initially reluctant, she actually prepares for her own death and taunts Sam into killing her, willingly dying to free Lucifer. So while the Lilith of Dark Light was very much a Jewish superhero, here we see a complete 180. Even as a villain, her story becomes defined by that Christian motive, a self-sacrifice for the greater, well, evil. 2010s have actually brought us 3 Liliths, but the most prominent is the Lilith from Netflix's Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Portrayed primarily by Michelle Gomez, this Lilith is a main character and antagonist. Her identity is actually kept secret from the audience until the 10th and final episode of Part 1. She appears first as a lost young woman, presumably injured, who is helped by Miss Wardwell, one of Sabrina's teachers at Baxter High. After stabbing Miss Wardwell with a pair of scissors, she either takes her place or possesses her body. It's a little unclear. She deceives Sabrina by first passing as her normal human teacher, and then later convincing Sabrina that she, Miss Wardwell, is a witch assigned by Sabrina's late father to watch after her. The audience is aware that Miss Wardwell is some kind of malevolent being working for Satan, the Dark Lord, but her true identity as Lilith is only hinted at once before the 10th episode, when the demon Batty Bat refers to her as Mother in episode 5.
You know me. Look closer.
Mother of demons.
That's right. You abandoned me, Mother. You left me to rot inside the configuration. Do not harm a hair on that child's head.
Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is also based on a Christian framework, but this Lilith is complicated. She's an antagonist meant to convince Sabrina to sign away her freedom to Satan, but she's simultaneously Sabrina's mentor as a witch. She is at once destructive and nurturing. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina makes no attempt to hide that it is a show about gender. The very first episode sets the tone when Sabrina's friend Susie, a fellow Baxter High teen who's caught up in their own journey of gender identity and comes out as trans in part 2, is assaulted by 4 of the school's football players who lifted up their shirt to see if they were a boy or a girl. When Sabrina goes to the principal to complain but doesn't know which football players are at fault and says they should all be questioned, he asks, "Are you suggesting a witch hunt?" To which she replies,
I don't care for that term.
And it's not just the mortal side of town dealing with this issue. In Sabrina's coven, the Church of Night, a gender war is brewing. Father Blackwood, the coven's high priest, is slowly revealed throughout part 1 to have misogynistic tendencies. It begins with comments directed at Lilith saying,
My dear demoness, your methods are weak. Your will is womanly.
and escalates to when he decides that the birth of his son is a sign that men are to rise to power within the coven.
Lord's sign, his blessing, that we are in the right. Hail to my firstborn son. Hail Judas.
Hail Judas! Hail Satan! Hail Judas! Hail Satan! Hail Judas! Hail Satan! Hail Judas!
By part 2, Father Blackwood has openly declared a misogynistic order for the Coven. The Coven worships Satan, the Dark Lord, but there's contention even there. When a witch turns 16, they sign their will over to the Dark Lord, and in return are given immense power. When Sabrina expresses her doubts to Prudence, a sort of frenemy, if you will,
signing my name in the Book of the Beast, knowing that on some level I'm giving up my freedom.
You are. In exchange for power. An even exchange.
But I want both. I want freedom and power.
He'll never give you that. The Dark Lord. The thought of you, of any of us having both, terrifies him.
Why is that?
He's a man, isn't he?
And among the women in the series, there's a conflict between women supporting women and women undermining women. Sabrina, Roz, and Susie, who later changes his name to Theo, start a women's support group at Baxter High, while at the Academy of Unseen Arts, Sabrina has to contend with the Weird Sisters' arrogance and bullying. Lilith, as a simultaneously nurturing and destructive figure, fits right at the center of this conflict. The series trades Lilith's infanticide for eating men and subtly corrupting and occasionally killing teenagers. It includes Lilith's motherhood as well. I mentioned earlier that a demon explicitly refers to Lilith as mother, and Lilith even refers to herself as mother of demons. But Lilith also takes on a mothering role in Sabrina's life as well. In her mission, she behaves attentively and affectionately towards Sabrina, though nearly always with an agenda. While most of her decisions can be traced to their manipulative motivations, Lilith also makes decisions towards Sabrina that don't have a clear agenda. Such as when she agrees to help Sabrina attempt to convince Prudence to not be a human sacrifice and cannibalistic meal for the Coven. In fact, a decision like that, encouraging Sabrina to break with tradition and showing a more corrupted underbelly of Coven politics, actually risks being detrimental to her mission. And even when Lilith creates a grand manipulative scheme, it can often have an undercurrent of a larger gendered issue. In the 10th and final episode of Part 1, Lilith releases the spirits of the Greendale 13 to take vengeance on the town. The Greendale 13 were witches that had been executed by the town a few centuries prior, and desire a violent revenge on all those they hold responsible, just everyone in town, mortal or otherwise. While Lilith's goal with such a move is to push Sabrina to take drastic measures in order to destroy the spirits of these women, when Sabrina succeeds, Lilith describes the burning of their spirits as releasing their anger. As for sexuality, the original Wardwell dressed in conservative clothing, kept her hair up, and wore glasses. When replacing her, Lilith wears her hair down and wears shorter, tighter dresses. This kind of choice veers in the direction of Supernatural's Lilith, but this Lilith's sexuality is laced with a mystery built on grief and anger. Like in Supernatural, Lilith here occasionally uses sexuality as a tool, as in that 10th episode when she decides to take the form of a teenage girl to lure a football player, sacrifice him, and summon the Greendale 13. But Lilith is rarely seen actively seducing anyone, and instead that sexuality is turned around.
Right, easy does it, nice and slow. That's it. There's plenty of room for all in the storm shelter. Don't you find this invigorating, Ms. Wardwell? I've always been fascinated by tornadoes myself, ever since The Wizard of Oz. And now here we are, our school, the only safe place in Greendale. I'm engorged with excitement.
Mr. Hawthorne.
Perhaps when all this is over, you and I might finally have that drink.
Lilith isn't charmed by Principal Hawthorne's advances, and she doesn't find amusement in them. She's uncomfortable and clearly wants the situation to stop. She eats him at the end of the episode, in case you were wondering. Rather than inducing fear in the audience, she garners sympathy. When Lilith talks about men in the series, she typically does so with disdain. But when it isn't with disdain, it's with a sort of grief that speaks to centuries of hardship. Lilith is ultimately successful in tempting Sabrina to sign her will to the Dark Lord. Her manipulation by way of the Greendale 13 worked, convincing Sabrina to take whatever measures to gain the necessary power to save the town. In the final moments of corruption, Lilith appropriates feminist rhetoric, telling Sabrina,
I know you're scared, Sabrina, because all women are taught to fear power. Own your power. Don't accept it from the Dark Lord. Take it. Wield it.
But the truth is, Sabrina is accepting that power from the Dark Lord, and she's giving up her freedom in exchange. After the reveal of Lilith's identity in the final episode of Part 1, Part 2 explores her past in greater detail. The Academy of Unseen Arts puts on a play written by Father Blackwood, showing the story of Lilith fleeing from Eden and meeting Lucifer. The discussion between Lilith and Lucifer is actually a rewrite of Lilith's argument with Adam from the Alphabet of Ben Sira.
Lilith, why do you lie so far away from me? Come closer.
I will not lie beneath you, but only by your side.
Is that what you said to your husband, Adam?
Making this televised adaptation of Lilith to actually be incredibly accurate. But as the play is written by the misogynistic Blackwood, the story is corrupted in favor of portraying Lucifer as a domineering figure that Lilith willingly submits to.
I'm curious about your adaptation, Father Blackwood. There are some departures from our sacred satanic texts. Lilith, for instance. I don't recall her wandering helplessly in the wilderness. She provided for herself like a survivalist.
You're beginning to sound like Sister Jackson, Zelda. Are you presuming, too, that I need dramaturgical support?
I'm not sure I could handle playing such a subservient character.
The ironic thing is that though the series wants us to see this as a corruption, it's a corruption of Lilith's tale that the series itself is participating in. Lilith is shown repeatedly throughout the series to be subservient to Satan. Her role in the plot is built around it, and she's even shown to kiss his hooves when asking for forgiveness. The point of Lilith's original tale is that she refused to be submissive to Adam, even when God himself demanded that she be. In what world would she simply turn around and submit herself to another man? Sabrina's Lilith runs into the same issue that Supernatural's does. By placing her within a Christian framework, Lilith is changed from a figure defined by her demand for equality into a figure that's subservient to the devil. In the final episode of Part 1, Lilith reveals her motivation along with her identity. Her mission, assigned to her by the Dark Lord, may be to deliver Sabrina to the Dark Lord, but she's doing so to groom Sabrina to replace her as Satan's foot soldier, so that Satan will finally choose her to be his queen. But at the end of the episode, Lilith's familiar points out that it seems far more likely that Satan will choose Sabrina as his queen, and thus the series sets the two up as sexual rivals. Even if Part 2 reveals Sabrina to be Lucifer's daughter, making that whole Sabrina being his queen thing rather incestuous. It's also difficult to ignore that while Michelle Gomez is not a Jewish actress, we are watching a dark-haired, large-nosed woman corrupt the blonde, button-nosed, virginal young girl, raising some anti-Semitic stereotyping flags for me, to be honest. Though her arc in the series ultimately has her turning against Lucifer and taking his place as the Queen of Hell, the writers seemingly failed to understand that such an arc was unnecessary for a Lilith character, that Lilith's story is already about her overcoming a patriarchal figure that she refused from the start to submit to. As Lilith gains popularity in American pop culture and is increasingly written into stories with a Christian framework, she appears to lose that fundamental conflict of equality that made her a feminist icon in the 20th century. She loses what makes her Jewish as well, and really what makes her Lilith. Perhaps it's that, in stories built around Satan as the ultimate villain, Lilith can only really ever take on the role of lieutenant. But more so, Lilith seems trapped within the hands of writers that don't know what to do with her motivations or inherent conflicts. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina arguably comes the closest to realizing the mythical figure, presenting a Lilith filled with nuance and a complex characterization, and keeping with her Ben Sira story. It falls short in its apparent inability to understand Lilith's choice to abandon Adam and paradise in search of equality, instead trading Adam for Satan, another male figure that demands her obedience. I honestly love the Lilith from Sabrina. Her arc was well written and Michelle Gomez did a phenomenal job of bringing her to life. But it does seem that, as these different ethical worldviews get mixed, as the Jewish concept of evil is thrown out in favor of the Christian concept of evil, even while adapting a Jewish character, something rather precious gets lost along the way. Darklight has its flaws, a lot of them. I'm literally willing to do a whole video on how absurd that movie is. But this Korean DVD cover is legendarily ridiculous. Like, it's not even accurate to the film. That doesn't That doesn't look like Shiri Appleby, and why does she have a flaming sword? I don't recall any flaming sword in this whole film. Look how absurd this DVD cover is. It's so funny. I'm so glad that I own this on DVD. It's hilarious.